My name is Margaret. I am 69 years old, and let me tell you something, I have seen a lot in my life. I have raised children, buried a husband, worked 32 years as a school librarian in Columbus, Ohio, and I have learned one very important thing in all those years. When someone tries to take advantage of a kind old woman, that kind old woman does not just sit down and take it. And what happened to me just this past weekend? You are not going to believe it. I could not believe it myself. So let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand who I am and where I come from before you can understand why this situation hit me the way it did. My name is Margaret Ellen Hayes, and I live in a little house on Birchwood Lane in Columbus, Ohio. It is a cream-colored house with a red front door and a porch where I sit every single morning with my coffee and watch the neighborhood wake up. I have lived in this house for 31 years. I raised my son Theodore here, right in this very house. I know every crack in the sidewalk, every neighbor by name, every shortcut through the park 2 blocks over. This is my home, and I love it deeply and completely. I retired 3 years ago from the Columbus Public Library System, where I worked for 32 years as a senior librarian. People always laugh when I tell them I was a librarian because they say, "Margaret, you do not seem like the quiet type." And they are absolutely right. I am not the quiet type. I am the type who organized community reading events and after-school programs and summer reading challenges that got 300 kids off the streets and into books every single June and July. I was not the shushing kind of librarian. I was the get excited about knowledge kind of librarian, and I loved every single minute of my career. But 3 years ago my knees started complaining a little more than usual, and my doctor said, "Margaret, you have done enough," and I thought, you know what, he is right. I have done enough. So I retired, and I have been enjoying my retirement very much, thank you. I garden, I walk, I visit my friend Carol who lives 4 houses down. I video call my sister in Phoenix every Sunday, and I spend time with my grandchildren Lily and Mason whenever I can. Now let me tell you about my son Theodore. Theo is 41 years old, and he is a good man. I say that with full sincerity. He works hard, he is kind, he calls me every few days, and he is a good father to Lily and Mason. He learned those things from his father and from me, and I am proud of him. Theodore married Brianna 8 years ago, and let me be very careful about how I say this next part, because I do not want to be unfair. Brianna is not a bad person. She is not evil. She is not a villain in some movie. But she and I have always had what I would call a complicated relationship. From the very beginning there was a little bit of tension. Nothing terrible. Nothing dramatic. Just that particular kind of tension that sometimes happens between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law when 2 strong women are both very sure of themselves and neither one wants to step back. Brianna works in marketing. She is very good at her job from what I understand. She is organized and driven, and she knows what she wants. I actually respect those qualities in a person. What I do not respect is when those qualities get applied to situations involving me in ways that I did not agree to and was not consulted about. And that is exactly what happened this past Saturday, and that is exactly what this whole story is about. It was Thursday afternoon when my phone rang and I saw it was Theodore calling. I picked up right away because I always pick up for Theo. He said, "Mom, how are you?" And I said, "I am fine, baby, what is going on?" And he sounded a little bit nervous, which right away I noticed because Theodore does not usually sound nervous when he calls me. He said, "Mom, I wanted to call and let you know that Brianna has a spa day planned for Saturday. And I have a work thing that came up unexpectedly, and we were wondering if you would be able to come watch Lily and Mason for the day." And I said, "Of course, baby, of course I can come watch my grandchildren. I love spending time with them. What time do you need me there?" And he said around 9 in the morning, and I said, "That is perfectly fine. I will be there at 9. Now let me stop right here for just one moment because I want you to notice something. Theodore called me Thursday to ask if I was available Saturday. He asked. He used the word wondering. He was polite and he gave me notice. That part was fine. That part was completely acceptable. A grandmother loves to be asked to spend time with her grandchildren, and I genuinely do love Lily and Mason more than I can properly express in words. Lily is 7 years old and she has my same stubborn streak and bright eyes, and she already loves books, which makes my librarian heart sing. Mason is 5 and he is the most imaginative little boy I have ever met in my life, always making up stories about dragons and superheroes and asking questions that honestly sometimes I do not know the answer to, and that is saying something because I spent 32 years surrounded by books. So Thursday the call was fine. The call was good. I was happy. I went to bed Thursday night feeling good about Saturday. I even started thinking about what fun things I might do with the kids because I am not the kind of grandmother who just parks children in front of a television screen. I believe in experiences. I believe in making memories. I was a librarian. Enrichment is in my bones. Friday morning I called Carol and told her I was babysitting Saturday. And she said, "Oh, how fun," and I said, "I know, I am thinking maybe I will take them to that little nature center on Route 16, because Lily has been asking about butterflies lately." And Carol said, "Margaret, that sounds just wonderful." And I felt good. I felt genuinely excited. Then Friday afternoon I got a text message. Not a phone call. A text message. From Brianna. And I am going to read you this text message as close to word for word as I can remember it, because I want you to fully appreciate what I was dealing with. The text said, and I quote, "Hey Margaret, just wanted to send over the schedule for Saturday so everything goes smoothly. I have attached a full itinerary for the kids. Breakfast is at 8:30, but I will handle that before I leave. You just need to be there by 9. 9 to 10 is quiet reading time, no screens. 10 to 11 is structured outdoor play in the backyard only. Please do not take them off the property. 11 to 12 is educational worksheet time. I am leaving the packets on the kitchen table. 12 to 1 is lunch. There are labeled containers in the fridge. Please do not substitute anything as Mason is in a picky eating phase and I do not want to upset his routine. 1 to 2 is rest time, both kids in their rooms even if they do not sleep, lights low, no noise. 2 to 3 is another round of worksheets. 3 to 4 is screen time if they have completed all worksheets satisfactorily. Please initial the worksheet completion checklist I am leaving on the counter. 4:30 is when I expect to be home. Please do not take them anywhere without letting me know first. Thanks so much, see you Saturday. I read that text once. Then I read it again. Then I put my phone down on the kitchen counter and I stood there for a full minute just breathing. Now I want to be very clear about something. I understand that parents have routines. I understand that children do better with structure. I understand all of that completely and I respect it. But what I had just received was not a gentle suggestion of a daily routine. What I had just received was a 7-hour minute-by-minute corporate-style itinerary, complete with a worksheet completion checklist that I was expected to initial. For a Saturday. For a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. On a beautiful spring day in May in Columbus, Ohio. And let me point out a few specific things that bothered me very particularly. First, she said do not take them off the property. Off the property. As if I were some kind of incompetent stranger who could not be trusted to take 2 children to a park without incident. I raised a child. Theodore survived. He is 41 years old and functioning perfectly well in society. Second, she said please do not substitute anything in the fridge. Now I understand picky eating, I truly do, but the implication that I might just randomly decide to feed the children something dangerous or inappropriate was a little bit insulting. Third, and this is the one that really got me, she said 2 to 3 is another round of worksheets. On a Saturday. A Saturday in May. When it is warm and sunny and the whole world is outside and available. She wanted me to sit these beautiful creative children down and do worksheets. For 2 separate hours. On their day off from school. I did not respond to that text Friday night. I needed time to think. I am 69 years old and I have learned that the first response you want to send is often not the response you should send. So I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and I sat on my porch and I watched the evening settle in over Birchwood Lane and I thought about what to do. And here's what I decided. I decided that I was going to show up Saturday morning, be perfectly pleasant, and then I was going to use my 69 years of wisdom and my 32 years of experience with children and my deep and abiding love for Lily and Mason to give those children the best possible Saturday I could give them. Would that look exactly like Brianna's itinerary? No. No, it would not. But would those children be safe, loved, cared for, fed, and wonderfully enriched? Absolutely yes. 100% yes. Without any question whatsoever. Saturday morning I woke up at 6:30, which is my normal time. I had my coffee on the porch. I watched a robin pulling a worm from the front yard and I took that as a good sign. I got dressed in my comfortable walking clothes, my good sneakers, my favorite blue cardigan, and I drove over to Theodore and Brianna's house on Maple Creek Drive, arriving at exactly 5 minutes before 9, just as I said I would. Brianna opened the door and she was already dressed in her spa outfit. You know, that kind of effortlessly casual, expensive-looking athleisure that women wear to spas. And she had her bag over her shoulder and her hair was done and she was clearly ready to walk out that door the moment I stepped through it. She smiled at me and said, "Oh good, you are right on time," and I smiled back and said, "Of course I am." She said, "The itinerary is on the kitchen table and the worksheet packets are right next to it and the lunch containers are labeled in the fridge," and I said, "I see, thank you, Brianna." She said Theodore should be back by 6 and I said that is fine. She said, "You have my number if there is an emergency," and I said, "I have had your number for 8 years, Brianna, I do know how to reach you." She laughed a small laugh that was not entirely comfortable, and then she called out to the kids that Grandma Margaret was here and she kissed them both goodbye and she walked out to her car. I stood in the doorway and watched her drive away. Then I closed the front door and I turned around and there were my 2 beautiful grandchildren standing in the living room looking at me. Lily in her little jeans and purple sneakers and Mason in his dinosaur shirt that he has worn approximately 400 times because it is his absolute favorite. And they both had that particular look that children get when they are not sure what the day is going to hold, but they are hoping very much that it is going to be something good. I crouched down to their level even though my knees complained a little about that, and I said, "Good morning, my loves." And Lily said, "Good morning, Grandma," and Mason launched himself at me for a hug that nearly knocked me over, and I laughed out loud and hugged him back hard. And right then and there in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that we were not spending this beautiful Saturday doing worksheet packets. I stood up and I looked at the kitchen table. There was the itinerary printed out and everything, 2 full pages. There were the worksheet packets, 3 of them stapled neatly. There was the checklist with a little box next to each item where I was apparently supposed to put my initials. I picked up the itinerary and I read through it one more time just to confirm that I had not misremembered or exaggerated it in my mind. I had not. It was exactly as the text had described. Rigid and scheduled and full of quiet indoor sedentary activities on a gorgeous May morning. I set the itinerary back down on the table. I walked to the window and looked outside. The sky was that particular shade of blue that only happens on perfect spring days. There were clouds, but they were the friendly white puffy kind, not the threatening kind. The temperature according to my phone was 68 degrees with a light breeze. It was, in short, the most perfect outdoor day you could possibly ask for. I turned back to Lily and Mason and I said, "Okay, my darlings, here is what we are going to do today." And Lily, smart as a whip, immediately said, "But Mommy left a schedule." And I said, "Yes, she did, sweetheart, and I appreciate that she did." And then I said, "But Grandma also has a schedule," and I tapped my temple with one finger and said, "Mine is right up here." Lily looked at me with those serious 7-year-old eyes and said, "What is on your schedule, Grandma?" And I said, "Well, first things first, have you 2 had breakfast?" And they both said yes, and I said, "Good, then let us go on an adventure." Mason's eyes went enormous. He said, "An adventure?" And I said, "An adventure." He said, "A real one?" And I said, "A real one." He said, "With dragons?" And I said, "Well, I cannot promise dragons, but I can promise butterflies." And Lily made a sound that I can only describe as a squeal of pure joy because Lily had been talking about butterflies for weeks. Theo had told me so, and I had remembered. Now before anyone starts worrying, let me tell you that I did send Brianna a text before we left the house. I am not unreasonable. I am not trying to cause chaos. I simply do not believe that chaos is what actually happened that day. My text to Brianna said, "Brianna, good morning. Kids are wonderful. We are going to spend the day out and about, starting at the Grange Audubon Center for their butterfly garden, then the park for lunch and play. All safe, all wonderful. Enjoy your spa day. You can reach me on my cell anytime. The children are in excellent hands. Margaret." Then I turned my phone to silent, put it in my purse, got both children into their car seats in my car, and we drove to the Grange Audubon Center on Indianola Avenue, which is this absolutely beautiful nature center right here in Columbus that has walking trails and ponds and gardens, and in the spring they have a butterfly program that is just magnificent. We arrived at the Audubon Center at about 9:45. I paid our admission and we walked in, and within about 30 seconds Mason spotted a duck near the pond and completely lost his mind with happiness, and Lily grabbed my hand and said, "Grandma, look at the flowers," and I looked, and yes, there were flowers everywhere. And beyond the flowers were the butterfly gardens, and even from a distance you could see the flutter of wings in the morning light. And it was honestly one of the most beautiful things I have seen in a while, and I have lived 69 years, so that is saying something. We spent almost 2 hours at the Audubon Center. Lily learned about 4 different species of butterflies from a very kind young naturalist named Jamie, who was doing a program for visitors that morning. She got to hold a painted lady butterfly on her finger, and the look on her face in that moment was the kind of thing that you put in your heart and keep there forever. Mason discovered that he was very interested in frogs after spotting one near the edge of the pond, And he asked Jamie approximately 47 questions about frogs in about 10 minutes, and Jamie handled it with great grace and patience, and I made a mental note to compliment the Audubon Center on their excellent staff. By 11:30 we were back in the car and both children were glowing with that particular energy that children get when they have been genuinely engaged and happy. Not the wired chaotic energy of too much sugar or too much screen time, but the deep satisfied happy energy of a child who has been out in the world learning things and feeling things and being alive in the most complete sense. I drove us to Goodale Park, which is one of my favorite parks in Columbus. It is beautiful and green and has plenty of space and good shady trees, and on a Saturday in May it is full of families and dogs, and all the good things that make a city feel alive and warm. I had packed a lunch in my own cooler that morning before I left the house. Now before you say anything, let me tell you what I packed. I packed peanut butter and honey sandwiches on whole wheat bread because I know for a fact that Mason eats those happily and has no allergy because Theodore told me so years ago. I packed apple slices. I packed a small bag of pretzels each. I packed juice boxes and water bottles. I packed 2 little containers of yogurt. It was a perfectly reasonable, nutritious lunch for 2 children, and I stand by it completely. We found a spot under a big oak tree and I spread out the blanket I had brought and we sat and had our lunch right there in the sunshine with the park sounds all around us, and Mason said, "Grandma, this is the best lunch I ever had in my whole life," and I said, "Mason, I think you might be exaggerating just a tiny bit," and he said, "No, I am not," and Lily said, "I like it too, Grandma," and honestly that was all the validation I needed. After lunch the children played. They ran around and chased each other, and Mason found a stick that he decided was a magic wand, and Lily found another child about her age named Sophie whose grandmother, and I love this, whose grandmother was also watching her for the day. Her grandmother's name was Susan, and I sat on a bench together while our grandchildren played, and we talked for probably 45 minutes about everything from grandchildren to retirement to the best garden centers in Columbus. And Susan was an absolute delight, and I got her phone number before we left because that is just the kind of connection you do not let slip away. Around 2:30 I took the children to get ice cream from a little truck that was parked near the park entrance. Mason got chocolate with rainbow sprinkles. Lily got strawberry. I got a small vanilla cone for myself because I have earned every ice cream I have ever eaten and I will not apologize for that. We sat on a bench and ate our ice cream in the sunshine, and Mason got chocolate all over his face, and Lily tried very hard to eat hers neatly, and did not entirely succeed, and it was perfect. It was just absolutely perfectly imperfect in the way that real life is and the way that real memories are made. On the drive home both children fell asleep in their car seats. Completely and totally asleep within about 4 minutes of getting on the road. That deep boneless sleep that children fall into when they have had a full and happy day. I drove slowly and carefully and I caught glimpses of their sleeping faces in my rearview mirror, and I thought this right here. This is what a Saturday is supposed to look like. I got them home around 3:45 and carried Mason inside. He barely stirred. And Lily walked in half asleep holding my hand, and I got them both settled on the couch with a light blanket, and they slept for another 40 minutes while I sat in the armchair nearby and read a magazine and had a glass of water and felt entirely at peace with every decision I had made that day. Brianna got home at 4:35. I heard her car in the driveway and I was already in the kitchen. She came through the door looking relaxed and glowy in that way that a spa day produces, and she called out, "I am home," and I said, "In here, Brianna," and she came into the kitchen and looked around and then looked at the table where the itinerary and worksheet packets were sitting exactly where she had left them, completely untouched. And her expression shifted just slightly. Just slightly. But I noticed. She said, "How were the kids?" and I said, "They were absolutely wonderful, truly a joy. They are napping on the couch right now." She said, "Napping?" and I said, "Yes, they had quite an active day." She said, "What did you all do?" and I said, "Well, we went to the Grange Audubon Center this morning for the butterfly program, and then we had lunch at Goodale Park, and then we played and had ice cream and then drove home, and they fell asleep in the car." Brianna looked at the untouched worksheet packets. Then she looked at me. Then she said, "I left an itinerary." And I said, "Yes, you did, and it was very thorough." She said, "Margaret, I specifically said to keep them on the property." And I said, "I know you did, Brianna, and I understand why you have routines. And I respect that you do. But I want you to know that your children are safe, they are happy. They are asleep right now, having had one of the most wonderful days they have had in a good while, if Lily and Mason's own words are anything to go by." Brianna took a breath. I could see her working through something internally. She said, "The worksheets," and I said, "Brianna, it is Saturday." She said, "They need the structure," and I said, "They need the sunshine and the butterflies and the ice cream and the park and the grandmother who loves them more than anything in this world, just as much if not more. Those things are also structure. Those things are also education." I spent 32 years helping children fall in love with learning, and I promise you that what those two children did today was learning of the highest and best kind. There was a silence. Not a comfortable one exactly, but not a terrible one either. Then from the living room we heard Mason's voice, still sleepy, saying Mommy, and Brianna went out to the living room and I heard her voice go soft the way it does when she talks to her children. That particular softness that even the most complicated people have for their children. And I heard Mason say, Mommy, we saw butterflies and a frog and I hold a real butterfly on my finger. Well, that was Lily who held it, but I saw it really close. And Mommy, we had ice cream and Grandma Margaret knows everything about frogs. Well, she looked it up on her phone, but she told me everything, and Mommy, it was the best day ever. I stood in the kitchen and I listened to that, and I did not feel smug. I want to be clear about that. I did not feel smug or triumphant. I felt something quieter and deeper than that. I felt the particular satisfaction of a woman who knows what matters and acted accordingly and was right. Brianna came back into the kitchen a few minutes later and she looked at me, and she said, I wish you had followed the schedule, Margaret. And I said, I know you do, Brianna. And I am sorry that it caused you stress. She said, it is not about stress, it is about consistency, and I said, I understand that. Then I said, Brianna, can I ask you something? She said, yes, and I said, when you were a little girl, when you were 7 or 5, what do you remember? She looked at me and I said, do you remember worksheets on a Saturday, or do you remember the days when something magical happened? She did not answer right away. I said, I am not trying to be difficult. I am truly not. I love your children and I love that you love them so much that you make schedules for them. But I am their grandmother, and it is my particular job to be the person who takes them to see the butterflies. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something that I did not entirely expect. She said, my grandmother used to take me to this little bakery every Saturday morning, and we would get one pastry each and sit by the window and she would tell me stories. And I said, see. And she almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Theodore came home about an hour later and the children were awake by then, and they told him everything with that explosive, excited energy that children use when they are recounting something wonderful, and Theodore caught my eye over their heads, and he gave me a look that I have known since he was about 3 years old. A look that means, Mom, you are something else and I love you for it. Did Brianna and I have a longer conversation later? No, not that evening. That is probably a conversation that will happen at some point in some form, and that is okay. I am not afraid of that conversation. I have been having honest conversations my whole life. I am 69 years old and I have learned that most things worth saying can be said kindly, and most conflicts worth resolving can be resolved with honesty and a willingness to see the other person. But here is what I know for certain. I know that Lily is going to remember the day she held a butterfly on her finger. I know that Mason is going to talk about the frog questions for weeks. I know that they ate their lunch under an oak tree in the sunshine and had ice cream and fell asleep in the car on the way home with full hearts and tired, happy bodies. I know that I gave them a Saturday that a Saturday deserves to be. And I know that when those children are grown, when they are 40 and 50 years old and someone asks them about their grandmother, they are not going to say she made us do worksheets. They are going to say she took us on adventures. She knew about butterflies and frogs. She packed juice boxes and let us get ice cream. She sat on a bench in the park with us and watched us play and laughed when we got chocolate on our faces. She made ordinary Saturdays feel like the most important days in the world. That is what grandmothers are for. That is what I am for. And no itinerary, no matter how many pages long or how many checkboxes it contains, is ever going to change that. Not as long as I am Margaret Ellen Hayes of Birchwood Lane, Columbus, Ohio, 69 years old, retired librarian, grandmother of 2, and proud of every single bit of it. Now let me ask you something before I go. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below because I love knowing where my people are coming from. And if you have a grandmother, a real one, the kind who takes you on adventures and makes you feel like the most important person in the world, please give this video a like right now. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and share this with a friend who needs to hear it today. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and take care of your grandmothers while you still can.